Hello BookTube, Books with Banks back again with another video in my One Beautiful Scene analysis series in which I go through Steven Erikson's Malazan Book of the Fallen, picking out and doing a deep dive on my favorite scenes. If you're curious about my other Malazan content, feel free to check out my other videos in the series and my playlists on my channel. Today we'll be looking at a specific moment from within the famous chapter 7 of Book 6, The Bonehunters. Similar to a couple videos ago, even though this scene is relatively early on in the book, and honestly the fact that pages 398 to 416 is early in any book is kind of hilarious, but even though this is well before the halfway point, it is a really powerful and climactic moment, and I would hate to spoil it for anyone who doesn't want it spoiled, so here's your spoiler warning for up through The Bonehunters, Chapter 7, Book 6 of Malazan Book of the Fallen. I won't really be spoiling anything from after this scene, though. If you've read it before, or if you're not too bothered by spoilers, please strap in as we dive in, or rather dive below, the ancient city of Egatan. Setting the scene. The Malazan 14th Army, led by Tavor Paran, has effectively defeated most of Shaikh Reborn's forces, and now they've pursued one of the remaining rebellion commanders named Leoman all the way to the ancient city of Egatan. An epic siege is underway when it becomes depressingly clear that Leoman has gotten his followers to basically sacrifice themselves and firebomb the entire ancient city, ambushing the invading Malazans at every turn and burning houses, buildings, and everything else down, attempting to trap them all and cook or, burn the 14th Army Marines alive from within the city. The fire starting out near the edge and, slowly working their way inwards. Now, Tavor and other factions and commanders remain outside of the city, helplessly watching the fires rage and her forces likely being burned alive inside. Meanwhile, the firestorm blazes within, and our Marines and several of our favorite characters, including Fiddler's squad, as well as a new squad we get in this book with the alcoholic Hellion, her and her squad, we get this whole assortment of colorful and diverse Marines desperately making their way inward to a temple in the middle of the city to try and escape the flames. The mage Bottle has a trick up his sleeve, as his ability to communicate with animals might actually be paying off in a moment. And of course, throw in a couple more wrinkles, these Marines find a man named Korab, who was an ally of Leoman, and Korab is with a bunch of children. So the Malazans capture him and sort of make him their prisoner, but Korab seems to have no love for this terrible firebombing plan of Leoman's, and he's also seeing kind of now how kind and desperate the Malazans are, contrasted with how insane and cruel his former allies' mass suicidal plan was. So this Korab character is in a bit of a moral crisis. This is all just setting the scene and getting us to the real meat of the chapter, in my opinion, even though tragic deaths and an abundance of action and excitement has already gone down by this point. Really, the meat of the scene is Bottle, the mage. He's using a rat and communicating with a rat basically to see if there's a way out of the city, kind of seeing through the rat's eyes, and seeing if there's a way that this rat can navigate to get out of the city through all of the ancient city ruins and rubble buried beneath the temple. You know how, like, with ancient cities, the city's sort of built on top of itself. That's kind of what's going on with Egatan here, and so Bottle's gone into the mind of the rat, communicating with her, I believe it's a girl rat, and he's following its path, trying to see if there's a way out if they dig down under the temple. So the next step is to bring all of the surviving Marines, the prisoner Korab, and all of the children down through a hole that they blow in the temple floor, and down through these winding ancient passages underneath the burning city. There's no light, no comfort, no surety that anyone will make it out alive. The only confidence and hope comes from Bottle following and figuring out the path of this rat of his. And here we get under the burning Egatan. So now I'm going to start the reading, and this section is broken up into several kind of smaller sections, jumping from character to character. So I'll stop to maybe comment a little bit after each of those, but they're fairly short-ish sections. So here we go, the first one. Bottle felt his body push through a fissure, then plunged downward onto the low-ceiling section of street. Rocks, mortar, and potsherds under his hands, cutting, scraping as he scrambled forward. Once walked this avenue in an age-long past. Wagons had rattled here, horse hooves clumping, and there had been rich smells, cooking from nearby homes, livestock being driven to the market squares, kings and paupers, great mages, and ambitious priests, all gone to dust. The street sloped sharply, where cobbles had buckled, sagging down to fill a subterranean chamber. No, an old sewer, brick-lined, and it was into this channel his rat had crawled. Pushing aside broken pieces of cobble, he pulled himself down into the shaft. Desiccated faces in a thin, shallow bed beneath him. The husks of dead insects, carapaces, crunching as he slithered along. A pale lizard, long as his forearm, fled in a whisper into a side crack. His forehead caught strands of spider's web, tough enough to halt him momentarily before audibly snapping. He felt something alight on his shoulder, race across his back, then leap off. Behind him, Bottle heard Cuddle coughing in the dust in his wake as it swept over the sapper on the gusting wind. A child had been crying somewhere back there, but was now silent. Only the sound of movement, gasps of effort. Just ahead, a section of the tunnel had fallen in. The rat had found a way through, so he knew the barrier was not impassable. Reaching it, he began pulling away the rubble. Alright, so I think it's fair to say that Bottle is really kind of our main character, or at least our main protagonist at this point, literally driving things forward, driving this whole group of people, pulling them through this situation. But he's also the sort of unlikely hero character that makes him extremely rootable and relatable, I think. So, like, he didn't have a terrible amount of power before this, but he's really doing the heroic thing here and leading the people out through under the city with his silly, little magic trick of communicating with animals in his special way. So yeah, I wanted to start the reading with one of the passages from Bottle's point of view, as they're all going through, making their way through these cramped passages, maybe a little more open passages, but super dark, super uncomfortable, super scary. Here we go. Smiles nudged the child ahead of her. "Go on," she murmured. "Keep going. Not far now." She could still hear the girl's sniffles. Not crying, not yet anyway, just the dust. So much dust now, with those people crawling ahead. Behind her, small hands touched her blistered feet again and again, lancing vicious stabs of pain up her legs, but she bit back on it, making no outcry. Damned brat don't know any better, does he? And why they got such big eyes, looking up like that, like starving puppies. Keep crawling, little one, not much further. The child behind her, a boy, was helping Tavos Pond, whose face was wrapped in bloody bandages. Korik was right behind them. Smiles could hear the half-city going on and on with some kind of chant, probably the only thing keeping the fool from deadly panic. He liked his open savanna, didn't he? Not cramped, twisting tunnels. None of this bothered her. She'd known worse. Times, long ago, she'd lived worse. You learned to only count on what's in reach, and so long as the way ahead stayed clear, there was still hope, still a chance. If only this brat of a girl wouldn't keep stopping. Another nudge. Go on, lass. Not much more. You'll see. I think so. Smiles is a really interesting character, and I think she really grows on me as the series progresses. But I mean, she's not the happiest. Like, her name's kind of ironic. She's not the most positive person, and I think this is a good little passage. It continues to convey the claustrophobia and the stress of their situation, digging out through under the city. But I think this starts to really hit at this idea where she's frustrated that they have to deal with these kids, and internally she's just thinking about how much more work, how much more of a burden this is, having to not only get themselves out of the city, but having other people to look after. But then when she's actually speaking to the child, she's being really kind of reassuring and calm, a lot more so than her internal thoughts are. So I think she's sort of betraying herself a little bit by, a sort of actions speak louder than words kind of idea. Like, I mean, just again, keep crawling, little one, not much farther, and then later on, go on, lass, not much more, you'll see, this reassuring. Obviously, Smiles has no idea if they're gonna make it out alive, how much further it is, but yeah, I really as far as that passage goes, that's the thing I really kind of wanted to focus on. Next, Gessler pulled himself along in pitch darkness, hearing Tulip's heavy grunts ahead of him, Crump's maddening singing behind him. The huge soldier whose bare feet Gessler's outstretched hands kept touching was having a hard time, and the sergeant could feel the smears of blood Tulip left behind as he squeezed and pulled himself through the narrow, twisting passage. Thick gasps, coughing. No, not coughing. Abyss, take us, Tulip, Gessler hissed. What's so funny? Tickling, the man called back. You keep tickling my feet. Just keep moving, you damn fool. Behind him, Crump's idiotic song continued. And I says, oh, I says, the marsh trees got soft feet and moss beards all the way down, and they sway in the smelly breeze from that swamp water all yellow and brown. Oh, we was in the froggy toady dawn, belly down in the leeches and collectin' spawn, 'cause when you give those worms a squeeze, the blue pinky ropes come slimin' down. And don't they taste sweet, and don't they taste sweet, sweet as Pete, oh yes, sweet as Pete. Gessler wanted to scream like someone up ahead was doing, but he couldn't summon the breath. It was all too close, too fetid. The once cool sliding air rank with sweat, urine, and Hood knew what else. Truth's face kept coming back to him, rising in his mind like dread accusation. Gessler and Stormy, they'd pulled the recruit through so much since the damned rebellion, kept him alive, showed him the ways of staying alive in this Hood-cursed world. And what does he do? He runs into a burning palace with a half-dozen cussers on his back. Gods, he was right on one thing, though. The fire couldn't take him. He went way in, and that's what saved us, so far. Blew that storm back. Saved us. Soldiers all around him were blistered, burned. They coughed with every breath drawn into scorched lungs. But not me. He could sense that godling within that firestorm, could sense it, a child raging with the knowledge that it was going to die all too soon. Good, you don't deserve nothing more. Fire couldn't hurt him, but that didn't mean he had to kneel before it in prayer, did it? He didn't ask for any of this. Him and Stormy and Truth, only Truth was dead now. He'd never expected. And I says, oh, I says, that old bridge got feet of stone and mortar white as bone, and the badgers dangle from the ledge, swinging all the day all the way home. Oh, we was pulling vines from you-know-where and stuffing our ears with sweetie sweet loam, just to get them badgers flying out of there into them cookpots in the hearthy home. And don't they taste sweet, and don't they taste sweet, sweet as Pete, oh yes, sweet as Pete. When he got out of here, he was going to wring Crump's scrawny neck. High Marshal, gods below. And I says, oh, I says, that Warlock's tower. Okay, I'll stop there. I think this passage, Gessler's a great character in his own right, but he kind of reflects there, like in the middle of it, the sort of nuggets of wisdom and like insight are all about his guilt that he felt that Truth was his charge. One of his two, closest allies and the closest friends in the last several books that we've had with Stormy and Gessler and Truth. Now Truth has died in the battle up above before they came down here. And he's just racked with guilt over this. But then this is kind of buried in the middle of this section because you have this hilarious stuff where Gessler's accidentally tickling Tulip's feet, and then Crump is singing this ridiculous song. So people just have so much time going through this ordeal to dwell on their mistakes, their past, like Gessler is here, but also to just, kind of start to lose it a little bit, singing just to take their mind off the stress, laughing at the tickling and how absurd that is. Just a great passage, I think. Another great passage adding on to this whole sequence, and you'll see as we go along, Erikson just keeps piling on more and more character exploration. Like he's not just using this moment to make it like a really high stakes dramatic thing. It's not like he thought, oh, there hasn't been action in a while, I need to throw in a really big action scene. No, it's the main purpose of this stuff, I think, is really to flesh out some of these characters, because a lot of times in these Moraine chapters we only get a couple pages from anyone's point of view, so seeing them in this stressful situation, it only furthers that, or each and every one of their own character developments. So, moving on from Gessler. Corporal Tar pulled on Balgrid's arms, ignoring the man's squeals. How the mage had managed to stay fat through that endless march was baffling, and now all too likely to prove deadly. Mind you, fat could be squeezed when muscled, bulk couldn't. That was something, at least. Balgrid shrieked as Tar dragged him through the crevice. "You're tearing my arms off." "You plug up here, Balgrid," Tar said. "An herb behind you's gonna take out his knife." A muted voice from the huge man behind Balgrid. "Damn right, I'll join you like a pig, mage, I swear it." The darkness was the worst of all. Never mind the spiders, the scorpions, and centipedes. It was the darkness that clawed and chewed on Tar's sanity. At least Bottle had a rat's eyes to look through. Rats could see in the dark, couldn't they? Then again, maybe they couldn't. Maybe they just used their noses, their whiskers, their ears. Maybe they were too stupid to go insane. But they're already insane. We're being led by an insane rat. "I'm stuck again. Oh gods, I can't move." "Stop yelling," Tar said, halting and twisting round, yet again reaching out for the man's arms. "Hear that, Balgrid?" What? "Not sure. Thought I heard herbs' knives coming out of their sheaths." The mage heaved himself forward, kicking, clawing. Here, just a quick scene, to show, people, they're soldiers, right? So they still have this soldier's humor, and they still have this soldier sense of command, and, trying to motivate each other to get through this whole thing. No matter how scary it is, no matter how dark it is. Next section. "You stop moving again," Balm snarled to the child in front of him, "and the lizards will get you. Eat you alive. Eat us all alive. Those are crypt lizards, you damned whelp. You know what crypt lizards do? I'll tell you what they do. They eat human flesh. That's why they're called crypt lizards, only they don't mind if it's living flesh." "For heaven's sake," Deadsmell growled behind him. "Sergeant, that ain't the way." "Shut your mouth. He's still moving, ain't he?" "Oh yes, ain't he just? Crypt lizards run. Oh yes." "Hope you ain't nobody's uncle, Sergeant. You're getting as bad as Wittershins, Corporal, with that babbling mouth of yours. I want a new squad. Nobody'll have you. Not after this. You don't know nothing, Deadsmell. I know if I was that child ahead of you, I'd shit right in your face." "Quiet! You give him ideas, damn you. Do it, boy, and I'll tie you up. Oh yes, and leave you for the crypt lizards." "Listen to me, little one," Deadsmell called out, his voice echoing. "Them crypt lizards, they're about as long as your thumb. Balm's just being I'm gonna skewer you, Deadsmell, I swear it." Again, more comedy, hilarious stuff. More comedy, but also tying it back into them taking care of these kids. Deadsmell wanting to go for the softer approach that we saw Smiles using, verbally at least. And then Balm hilariously just not giving a care, just kind of trying to use fear a little bit to motivate the kid to keep going. Really, really interesting stuff. It's a cute scene. It's funny. Karab Belenth, the new Alas, dragged himself forward. The Malazan in his wake was gasping, the only indication that the man still followed. They had managed to drop one of the copper panels over the pit, burning their hands. Bad burns. The pain wouldn't go away. Korab's palms felt like soft wax, pushed out of shape by the stones they gripped, the ledges they grasped. He had never felt such excruciating pain before. He was sheathed in sweat, his limbs trembling, his heart hammering like a trapped beast in his chest, pulling himself through a narrow space. He sank down onto what seemed to be the surface of a street. Although his head scraped stone rubble above, he slithered forward, gasping, and heard the sergeant slip down after him. Then the ground shook, dust pouring down thick as sand, thunder, one concussion after another, pounding down from above. A rush of searing hot air swept over them. From behind. Smoke, dust. "Forward," Strink screamed. "Before the ceiling goes." Karab reached back, groping, until he clasped one of the Malazan's hands. The man was half buried under rubble, his breath straining beneath the settling weight. Karab pulled, then pulled harder. A savage grunt from the Malazan then, amidst clattering, thumping bricks and stones. Korab tugged the man clear. "Come on," he hissed. There was a pit ahead, a sewer. The rest went down there. "Grab my ankle, Sergeant." The wind was beating back the roiling heat. Korab pitched headfirst into the pit, dragging Strings with him. So this is the beginning of, or this is early on in the Korab-Strings kind of relationship where Strings, or Fiddler, is the Malazan soldier who is most in charge of holding their new prisoner captive. However, this prisoner doesn't really think he has loyalties to Leoman or the enemy anymore, doesn't know if he should be loyal to the Malazans, so their relationship starts here. It's pretty interesting, and then even though the Malazans are his captors, he's He's helping to pull Fiddler free of the rubble. Interesting stuff. Going on, we get back to Bottle finally. The rat had reached a vertical shaft, rough-walled enough so that she could climb down. The wind held up it, filled with rotted leaves, dust, and insect fragments. The creature was still descending when Bottle pulled himself up to the ledge. The detritus bit at his eyes as he peered down. Seeing nothing, he pulled free a piece of rubble and tossed it downward out from the wall. His soul, riding the rat's own, sensed its passage. Rodent ears pricked forward, waiting. 4 human heartbeats later, there was a dull, muted crack of stone on stone. A few more, then nothing. Oh, gods. Cuddle spoke behind him. What's wrong? A shaft goes straight down, a long way down. Can we climb it? My rat can. How wide is it? Not very, and gets narrower. We got wounded people back here, and Hellion's still unconscious. Bottle nodded. Do a roll call. I want to know how many made it. We also need straps, rope, anything and everything. Was it just me, or did you hear the temple come down? Cuddle turned about and started the roll call and the request for straps and rope, then twisted around once more. Yeah, it went down all right. When the wind dropped off, thank good it's back, or we'd be cooking or suffocating or both. Well, we're not through this yet. I know what you're thinking, Bottle. You do? Think there's a rat god? I hope so, and I hope you're praying good and hard. A rat god, maybe. Hard to know with creatures that don't think in words. I think one of us, one of the bigger, stronger ones, could wedge himself across and help people down. If we get enough straps and stuff to climb down, tulip maybe, or that other corporal herb, but there ain't room to get past anyone. I know. I'm going to try to climb down. Where's the rat? Down below it. Reach the bottom. It's waiting there. Anyway, here goes. Drawing on the Thirwarren to pierce the darkness, he moved out to the very edge. The wall opposite looked to be part of some monumental structure. The stones skillfully cut and fitted. Patches of crumbling plaster covered parts of it, as did sections of the frieze fronting that plaster. It seemed almost perfectly vertical. The narrowing of the gap was caused by the wall on his side, a much rougher facing, with projections remaining from some kind of elaborate ornamentation. A strange clash of styles for 2 buildings standing so close together. Still, both walls had withstood the ravages of being buried, seemingly unaffected by the pressures of sand and rubble. All right, he said to Cuddle, who had drawn up closer. This might not be so bad. You're what, 20 years old? No wounds. Thin as a spear. Fine, you've made your point. Bottle pushed himself further out, then drew his right leg round. Stretching it outward, he slowly edged over onto his stomach. Damn, I don't think my leg's long. The ledge he leaned on splintered. It was, he suddenly realized, nothing but rotted wood, and he began sliding, falling. He spun over, kicking out with both legs as he plummeted, throwing both arms out behind and to the sides. Those rough stones tore into his back, one outcrop cracking into the base of his skull and throwing his head forward. Then both feet contacted the stone of the wall opposite, flinging him over headfirst. Oh, hood. Sudden tug, snapping sounds, then more, pulling at him, resisting, slowing his descent. Gods. Webs. His left shoulder was tugged back, turning him over. He kicked out again and felt the plastered wall under his foot, reached out with his right arm, and his hand closed on a projection that seemed to sink like sponge beneath his clutched fingers. His other foot contacted the wall, and he pushed with both legs until his back was against rough stone, and there were spiders, each as big as an outstretched hand, crawling all over him. Bottle went perfectly still, struggling to slow his breathing, hairless, short-legged, pale amber. But there was no light, and he realized that the creatures were glowing, somehow lit from within, like lantern flame behind thick, gold-tinted glass. They had swarmed him now. From far above, he heard Cuddle calling down in desperate, frightened tones. Bottle reached out with his mind and immediately recoiled at the blind rage building in the spiders, in flashes of memory. The rat, their favored prey, somehow evading all their snares, climbing down right past them, unseeing, unaware of the hundreds of eyes tracking its passing. And now, this. Heart thundering in his chest, Bottle quested once more. A hive mind of sorts. No, an extended family. They would mass together, exchange nutrients. When one fed, they all fed. They had never known light beyond what lived within them, and, until recently, never known wind. Terrified, but not starving, thank hood. He sought to calm them, flinched once more as all motion ceased, all attention fixed now on him. Legs that had been scrambling over his body went still, tiny claws clasping hard in his skin. Calm, no reason to fear. An accident and there will be more. It cannot be helped. Best go away now, all of you. Soon the silence will return. We will have gone past, and before long, this wind will end, and you can begin to rebuild. Peace, please. They were not convinced. The wind paused suddenly, then a gust of heat descended from above. Flee! He fashioned images of fire, and his mind drew forth from his own memory scenes of people dying, destruction all around. The spiders fled. 3 heartbeats and he was alone, nothing clinging still to his skin. Nothing but strands of wiry anchor lines, tattered sheets of web, and trickling down his back from the soles of his feet, from his arms, blood. Damn, I'm torn up bad, I think. Pain now, awakening. Everywhere, too much. Consciousness fled. From far above, bottle! Stirring, blinking awake. How long had he been hanging here? I'm here, Cuddle. I'm climbing down, not much further, I think. Grimacing against the pain, he started working his feet downward. The space was narrow enough now that he could straddle the gap. He gasped as he pulled his back clear of the wall. Something whipped his right shoulder, stinging hard, and he ducked, then felt the object slide down the right side of his chest, the strap of a harness. From above, I'm climbing down. Okay, so this is kind of just an action scene to move things forward, see how they deal with this obstacle of a massive pit that they have to descend down. Of course, everything with the spiders is a little terrifying. However, I do think that in addition to Bottle seeing through the eyes of the rats, him kind of going into the mines and trying to understand what the spiders are going through, where they're coming from, what he can say, what images he can put in their minds to scare them or make them understand, anything like that. I think it's all really fascinating stuff, and it's something that Erickson could really only do with a character with this magical ability, and I think it lends some really interesting ideas about compassion and like animal compassion, and yeah, and I think it's really fascinating. There's also maybe a bit of a metaphor between the hive mind, family-like mind of the spiders. Compare that to the hive family sort of mindset of like a unit of soldiers. As by this point in the series, the military fantasy elements are really picking up, I think. And yeah, I think it's just an interesting comparison to make there. But yeah, so action, things are happening. They're going down and into this pit, and Bottle is continuing to prove himself the hero of the situation. Korik called behind him. Shard, you still with us? The man had been gibbering. They'd all discovered an unexpected horror, that of stopping. Moving forward had been a tether to sanity, for it had meant that somewhere ahead, Bottle was still crawling, still finding a way through. When everyone had come to a halt, terror had slipped among them, closing like tentacles around throats and squeezing. Shrieks, panicked fighting against immovable packed stone and brick, hands clawing at feet, rising into a frenzy, then voices bellowing, calling back. They'd reached a shaft of some kind. They needed rope, belts, harness straps. They were going to climb down. There was still a way ahead. Korik had, through it all, muttered his chant, the child death song, the Seti rite of passage from whelp into adulthood, a ritual that had, for girl and boy alike, included the grave log, the hollowed-out coffin, and the night-long internment in a crypt of the bloodline, buried alive for the child to die, for the adult to be born. A test against the spirits of madness, the worms that lived in each person, coiled at the base of the skull, wrapped tight about the spine, worms that were ever eager to awaken, to crawl, gnawing a path into the brain, whispering and laughing or screaming, or both. He had survived that night. He had defeated the worms, and that was all he needed for this, all he needed. He had heard those worms eating into soldiers ahead of him, soldiers behind him, into the children as the worms raced out to take them as well. For an adult to break under fear, there could be no worse nightmare for the child that witnessed such a thing. For with that was torn away all hope, all faith. Korik could have none of them, or could save none of them. He could not give them the chant, for they would not know what it meant, and they had never spent a night in a coffin. And he knew, had it gone on much longer, people would start dying, or the madness would devour their minds completely, permanently, and that would kill everyone else, everyone. The worms had retreated, and now all he could hear was weeping, not the broken kind, but the relieved kind, weeping and gibbering, and he knew they could taste it, could taste what those worms had left behind, and they prayed, not again, no closer, please, never again. Corporal Shard? What, damn you? Limp, how is he? I keep kicking at him, hitting what I think is an arm, but he's not moving. Can you climb ahead? Can you check? He's knocked out. How did that happen? I crawled onto him and pounded his head against the floor until he stopped screaming. You sure he's alive? Limp? His skull is solid rock, Korik. He heard movement back there, asked, what now? I'll prove it to you. Give this broke leg a twist. Lemp shrieked. Glad you're back, soldier, Shard said. Get away from me, you bastard. It wasn't me who panicked. Next time you think about panicking, Lemp, just remind yourself I'm here, right behind you. I'm going to kill you someday, Corporal. As you like. Just don't do it again. Korik thought back to the babbling noises he'd heard from Shard, but said nothing. More scuffling sounds, then a bundle of rope and leather straps, most of them charred, was pushed into Korik's hands. He dragged it close, then shoved it out ahead to the small boy huddled behind Tavos Pond. Push it on, lad, he said. You, the boy said. I heard you. I listened. And you was all right, wasn't you? Yes. I'll teach it to you. For the next time. Yes. So, Korik... a slightly more pensive character than others that we've talked about. Really interesting, Erikson taking this moment to kind of give us a bit of backstory about him, about what the kind of rights into adulthood are like for his culture. Also interesting to use this as like this is how Korik knew he could handle not going crazy in these confined, highly stressful, terrifying situations. But Korik is then in turn worried about everyone else, worried about the sort of metaphorical worms of like madness and frustration and panic getting to everyone else. Especially he's worried about the kids, which is he could teach them all this. And then right at the very end there, after this sort of comical exchange between soldiers, right at the very end there, you realize that even if Korik hadn't intended to, what he was saying had in some way helped at least one of the children cope with the fear and the panic of the situation. Beautiful little moment there. Moving on. Someone had shouted back instructions, cutting through the frenzy of terror, and people had responded, stripping away whatever could be used as a rope. Chilled beneath a gritty layer of sweat, Tar settled his forehead onto the stones under him. Smelling dust mingled with the remnants of his own fear. When the bundle reached him, he drew it forward, then struggled out of what was left of his own harness and added it to the pathetic collection. Now, at least, they had a reason to wait. They weren't stopped because Bottle had run out of places to crawl. Something to hold on to. He prayed it would be enough. Behind him, Balgrid whispered, I wish he was marching across the desert again. I wish we was marching across the desert again. That road, all that space on both sides. I hear you, Tar said. And I also remember how you used to curse it. The dryness, the sun. Sun, I'm so crisp I'll never fear the sun again. Gods. I'll kneel in prayer before it. I swear it. If freedom was a god, Tar. If freedom was a god. Now that's an interesting thought. That's kind of just a really short section, just touching in with these characters. Sort of grass is green on the other side kind of thing. Soldiers will always find something to complain about. Maybe that's in there a little bit. But in a good-hearted way, a humorous sort of way to pass the time. Okay, moving on. Thank hood all that screaming stopped, Balm said, plucking at whatever was tingling against all his skin. Tingling, prickling like some kind of heat rash. Heat rash, that was funny. Sergeant, Deadsmell said, it was you doing all that screaming. Quiet, you damned liar. Wasn't me, was the kid ahead of me. Really? I don't know, he spoke to Alhanese. I will skewer you, Corporal. Just one more word, I swear it. Gods, I'm itchy all over, like I've been rolling in fool's pollen. You get that after you've been panicking, Sergeant. Fierce sweat, it's called. You didn't piss yourself too, did you? I'm smelling. I got my knife out, Deadsmell, you know that? All I gotta do is twist round and you won't be bothering me no more. You tossed your knife, Sergeant, in the temple. Fine, I'll kick you to death. Well, if you do, can you do it before I have to crawl through your puddle? Again, touching back in with Balm and Deadsmell, another funny exchange. Moving on. The heat is winning the war, Korab said. I answered strings behind him, his voice faint, brittle. Here. Something was pushed against Korab's feet. He reached back and his hand closed on a coil of rope. You were carrying this? Was wrapped around me. I saw Smiles drop it outside the temple. It was smoldering, so that's not a surprise. As he drew it over him, Korab felt something wet, sticky on the rope. Blood, you're bleeding out, aren't you? Just a trickle, I'm fine. Korab crawled forward. There was some space between them and the next soldier, the one named Widdershins. Korab could have kept up had he been alone back here, but he would not leave the Malazan sergeant behind. Enemy or no, such things were not done. He had believed them all monsters, cowards, and bullies. He had heard that they are their own dead, but no. They were just people. No different from Korab himself. The tyranny lies at the feet of the Empress. They're all just soldiers, that's all they are. Had he gone with Leomin, he would have discovered none of this. He would have held on to his fierce hatred for all Malazans and all things Malazan. But now, the man behind him was dying, a Falari by birth, just another place conquered by the Empire, dying, and there was no room to get to him. Not here, not yet. Here, he said to Widdershins, pass this up. Hood, take us. That's real rope. Aye, move it along fast now. Don't order me around, bastard. You're a prisoner. Remember that. Karab crawled back. The heat was building, devouring the thin streams of cool air sliding up from below. They couldn't lie still for much longer. We must move on. From Strings, did you say something, Karab? No, nothing much. Another beautiful little kind of episode of the Strings and Korab relationship growing, and Korab starting to rethink his sense of duty and rethink who he's loyal to, what he's loyal to, what the Malazans are actually doing, the fact that they're real people. Really, really interesting, powerful stuff. Next section. From above came sounds of Cuddle making his way down the makeshift rope, his breath harsh, strained. Bottle reached the rubble-filled base of the fissure. It was solidly plugged. Confused, he ran his hands along both walls. His rat? There, at the bottom of the sheer, vertical wall. His left hand plunged into air that swept up and past. An archway. Gods, what kind of building was this? An archway, holding the weight of at least 2, maybe 3 stories worth of stonework. And neither the wall nor the arch had buckled, after all this time. Maybe the legends are true. Maybe Egatan was once the first holy city, the greatest city of all, and when it died at the great slaughter, every building was left standing, not a stone taken. And when it died at the great slaughter, every building was left standing, not a stone taken, standing to be buried by the sands. He lowered himself to twist feet first through the archway, almost immediately contacting heaps of something. Rubble? Nearly filling the chamber beyond. Rubble that tipped and tilted with clunking sounds, rocked by his kicking feet. Ahead, his rat roused itself, startled by the loud sounds as Bottle slid into the chamber. Reaching out with his will, he grasped hold of the creature's soul once more. All right, little one. The work begins again. His voice trailed away. He was lying on row upon row of urns, stacked so high they were an arm's reach from the chamber ceiling. Groping with his hands, Bottle found that the tall urns were sealed, capped in iron, the edges and level tops of the metal intricately incised with swirling patterns. The ceramic beneath was smooth to the touch, finely glazed. Hearing Cuddle shouting that he'd reached the base behind him, he crawled in towards the center of the room. The rat slipped through another archway opposite, and Bottle sensed it, clambering down, alighting on a clear level stone floor, then waddling ahead. Grasping the rim of one urn's iron cap, he strained to pull it loose. The seal was tight. His efforts eliciting nothing. He twisted the rim to the right, nothing. Then the left, a grating sound. He twisted harder. The cap slid, pulled loose from its seal. Crumbled wax fell away. Bottle pulled upward on the lid. When that failed, he resumed twisting it to the left and quickly realized that the lid was rising incrementally with every full turn. Probing fingers discovered a canted, spiraling groove on the rim of the urn, crusted with wax. 2 more turns and the iron lid came away. A pungent, cloying smell arose. I know that smell. Honey. These things are filled with honey. For how long had they sat here, stored away by people long since dust? He reached down and almost immediately plunged his hand into the cool, thick contents, a balm against his burns, and now an answer to the sudden hunger awakening within him. Bottle? Through here. I'm in a large chamber under the straight wall. Cuddle. There's urns here, hundreds of them, filled with honey. He drew his hands free and licked his fingers. Gods, it tastes fresh. When you get in here, salve your burns, Cuddle. Only if you promise you're not going to crawl through an ant nest anywhere ahead. No ants down here. What's the count? We got everybody. Strings? Still with us, though the heat's working its way down. Enough rope and straps, then. Good. Aye, so long as they hold. Seems Herb's proposing to carry Hellion down, on his back. Is the next one on their way? Aye, how do these lids come off? Turn them, Widdershins, and keep turning them. Bottle listened as the man worked on one of the lids. Can't be very old, this stuff, to still be fresh. There's glyphs on these lids, Cuddle. I can't see them, but I can feel them. My grandmother, she had a ritual blade she used in her witchery. The markings are the same, I think. If I'm right, Cuddle, this ironwork is jagged. What? But the urns are First Empire. Feel the sides, smooth as eggshell. If we had light, I'd wager anything. They're sky blue, so with a good enough seal, I can still taste the flowers in this bottle. I know. You're talking thousands and thousands of years, yes. Where's your favorite rat? Hunting us a way through. There's another chamber opposite, but it's open, empty. I mean, we should move in there to give the others room. What's wrong? Bottle shook his head. Nothing. Just feeling a little strange. Cut my back up some. It's gone numb. Hood's breath. There was some kind of poppy in that honey, wasn't there? I'm starting to feel... God's below. My head's swimming. Yeah, better warn the others. Though he could see nothing, Bottle felt as if the world around him was shuddering, spinning. His heart was suddenly racing. Shit. He crawled towards the other archway, reached in, pulled himself forward, and was falling. The collision with the stone floor felt remote, yet he sensed he'd plunged more than a man's height. He remembered a sharp, cracking sound, realized it had been his forehead hitting the flagstones. Cuddle thumped down on top of him, rolled off with a grunt. Bottle frowned, pulling himself along the floor. The rat, where was she? Gone. I lost her. Oh no, I lost her. Moments later, he lost everything else as well. So that's just another section of Bottle going through. Bottle and Cuddle kind of leading this charge to get everyone through. They discover, or they, make it down the shaft with the spider webs and the spiders and whatnot, only to discover this honey, which at first seems like a great thing. Now it seems like it might be drugged in some way, and it might lead to interesting things going on in their minds. And we know, as the reader, it's tense because, oh no, if they're passing out, are the other soldiers going to find the honey, and are they going to have some as well? So we'll keep going. Korab had dragged an unconscious Strings down the last stretch of tunnel. They'd reached the ledge to find the rope dangling from 3 sword scabbards wedged across the shaft, and vague sounds of voices far below. Heat swirled like serpents around him as he struggled to pull the Malazan up closer to the ledge. Then he reached out and began drawing up the rope. The last third of the line consisted of knots and straps and buckles. He checked each knot, tugged on each strand, but none seemed on the verge of breaking. Korab bound the Malazan's arms, tight at the wrists, then the man's ankles, one of them sheathed in blood, and checking for bandages, he discovered none remaining. Just the ragged holes left by the spear, and from the rope at the ankles he made a center knot between the sergeant's feet. With the rope end looped in one hand, Korab worked the man's arms over his head, then down so that the bound wrists were against his sternum. He then pushed his own legs through so that the Malazan's bound feet were against his shins. Drawing up the center knotted rope, he looped it over his head and beneath one arm, then cinched it into a tight knot. He worked his way into the shaft, leaning hard for the briefest of moments on the wedged scabbards, then succeeding in planting one foot against the opposite wall. The distance was a little too great. He could manage only the tips of his feet on each wall, and as the weight of Strings on his back fully settled, the tendons in his ankles felt ready to snap. Gasping, Korab worked his way down. 2-man heights, taken in increasing speed, control slipping away with every lurch downward. Then he found a solid projection on which he could rest his right foot, and the gap had narrowed enough to let his left hand reach out and ease the burden on that leg. Korab rested. The pain of deep burns, the pounding of his heart. Some time later, he resumed the descent, easier now, the gap closing. Then he was at the bottom, and he heard something like laughter from his left, low, which then trailed away. He searched out that side and found the archway through which he tossed the rope, hearing it strike a body a little way below. Everyone's asleep, no wonder. I could do with that myself. He untied Strings, then clambered through, found his feet balancing on tight-packed, clunking jars. The sounds of snoring and breathing on all sides, and the sweet, cloying smell. He pulled Strings after him, eased the man down. Honey. Jars and jars of honey. Good for burns, I think. Good for wounds. Finding an open jar, Korab scooped out a handful, crawled over to the sergeant, and pushed the honey into the puncture wounds. Salved the burns on Strings and on himself. Then he settled back. Numbing bliss stole through him. Oh, this honey... It's Carol Bara, the God-bringer. Oh. Okay, so I think without, getting to the end of the chapter, I think we'll stop there, even though it's still got about 30 pages to go. Erickson breaks here to actually take us, the readers, back to the squads and commanders and the command tents and stuff outside the city. So I'll just, kind of use that as the natural conclusion for the segment I wanted to analyze today. And with kind of these concluding questions I usually ask, let's first think about the structure of the sequence. So even though Bottle is leading things, so many unique characters get a moment to shine throughout this suffocating, terrifying sequence, and they're all trying to survive. This gives us like a real sort of unified, we're all in it together now kind of vibe. Either they'll make it out or they don't. But further still, many of these sequences reference the children the different soldiers are taken care of. In and of itself, this pairs two of Erikson's kind of main ideas throughout the whole series. Number one, that soldiers can be more, can do more than just soldiering. And then two, that there can be no justice when, to quote an earlier book, Deadhouse Gates, children are dying in the world. And through these different segments, we get some humor, we get compassion, we get panic, all great emotional moments beautifully woven together in what's really this kind of whole novella of a chapter wedged right here in the middle of the Bonehunters. And finally, let's narrow our focus in on the theme just a little bit more. Following up on what I just said about soldiers, I think The Bonehunters is a book all about finding one's purpose and feeling comfortable in your place in life, what you're doing, appreciating the role that you're playing in the world. And also in an individual's ability to kind of find their agency and make choices for themselves. This is reflected all throughout the book through Gano's Perrin coming into his own as not only master of the deck, but everything he goes through with the Plague storyline. This is also seen in Kalam questioning his own purpose and loyalties, and even there are echoes of this in Hedge wandering around in death. Further still, what does someone like Mappo do now that he's lost his purpose? And then another character is Scalara's purpose. From here on out, is it just to give birth and then be a mother? And surely she must have more of a purpose, more to do in life than just that, right? Anyway, before I spiral too far away from the novel's titular cast of characters, the Bonehunters, as a collective and as individuals, the Bonehunters, especially these soldiers crawling through the ruins, this terrible ordeal, while their first purpose was to stamp out Shaik's rebellion, now that that's over and has met a rather drastic and devastating end with this conflagration and this horrible siege gone wrong, now what do? Helping the children and helping themselves out of the city is one of their first really big steps in this direction of sort of self-determination, claiming their own agency, and this journey to define more purpose for not just themselves, but Tavor Perrin's entire 14th Army. All right, all that said, a beautiful scene. If you haven't read this book yet, I implore you to check out the whole 100+ page long sequence for yourself. Again, that's chapter 7 of the Bonehunters. I couldn't quite do it all justice here, but please let me know in the comments if my reading or interpretation of any of these themes or characters differs from your own, or misses out on an important element maybe of context from earlier or later in the book. My last video got a comment pointing out something I had in fact missed that would have really helped and boosted my analysis. So my analyses of these scenes, they're definitely never like the final word on anything. I really just want to use these as jumping off points for conversations about all of these different themes and how those themes are presented to us through these famous moments. So if the more people we can get commenting like that, maybe correcting slight mistakes or pointing to moments that stood out to them more than stuff that stood out to me from earlier, that might impact whatever I'm talking about, please, I totally welcome it all, and I'd love to hear more from the community about any of these kind of deeper thinking sort of things. If you haven't already, it would mean a ton to me if you could like and subscribe and recommend these videos to any friends. That would also help me keep up my momentum in getting these videos out pretty regularly. My next video, unlike all of these previous intense, emotional, dramatic scenes I've explored, I'll be actually looking at a hilarious exchange or two from our favorite duo of Tehol and Bug in Book 7, Reaper's Gale. I hope you'll look forward to that video, and thank you so much for watching. Bye.